In 1974, petitioners United Steelworkers of America and Kaiser Aluminum Chemical Corporation entered into a master collective bargaining agreement covering terms and conditions of employment at 15 Kaiser plants. So that's the union and the company. The agreement included an affirmative action plan designed to eliminate conspicuous racial imbalances in Kaiser's then largely white craft workforces by reserving for black employees 50% of the openings in in-plant craft training programs, until the percentage of black craft workers in a plant is commensurate with the percentage of blacks in the local labor force. This litigation, that is the case that we're looking at right now, arose from the operation of the affirmative action plan at one of Kaiser's plants, where prior to 1974, only about 4% of the skilled craft workers were black, even though the local workforce was approximately 39% black. Pursuant to the national agreement, Kaiser, rather than continuing its practice of hiring trained outsiders, established a training program to train its production workers to fill craft openings, selecting trainees on the basis of seniority, with the proviso that at least 50% of the trainees were to be black until the percentage of black skilled craft workers in the plant approximated the percentage in the local labor force. During the plan's first year of operation, 7 black and 6 white craft trainees were selected from the plant's production workforce, with the most senior black trainee having less seniority than several white production workers whose bids for admission were rejected. Okay, so just so we all are on the same page and understand what's going on, there's this company, Kaiser Aluminum Chemical Corporation. They have instituted this plan for advanced training. Admission to the advanced training is competitive. Once you complete the advanced training program, almost certainly your salary will increase and other benefits will increase as well. The criterion for selection is seniority. However, they have also instituted an affirmative action criterion, which is supposed to trump seniority, take precedence over seniority, and that has meant that of the 13 admittees during the plan's first year of operation, 7 are black and 6 are white. Okay, now let's talk about the case in question. Thereafter, respondent Brian Weber, one of those white production workers, instituted a class action in federal district court, alleging that because the affirmative action program had resulted in junior black employees receiving training in preference to senior white employees, Weber and other similarly situated white employees had been discriminated against in violation of the provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that make it unlawful to discriminate because of race in hiring and in the selection of apprentices for training programs. So here are the facts. Brian Weber is 32 years old and has worked as a laboratory assistant at a chemical plant. His company, Kaiser Aluminum and Chemical Corporation, has had a policy of allowing whites and blacks into a training program on a one-to-one basis, even though there are many more white applicants than blacks. This policy resulted from a collective agreement with United Steelworkers of America. Weber has been rejected by the training program. More training would have led to a pay raise. Weber is claiming that this violates the Civil Rights Act. The company and the union are arguing that they are pursuing, sorry for the typo, affirmative action to remedy historical disadvantages among blacks. Okay. So there we have it. Those are the facts of the case. This is a very famous historical case. Please do not look up online what the decision was in this case from the Supreme Court. Rather, let us split into groups. Are there any questions before we do split into groups? Everybody understand? Let's split into groups. Group of 3 here. Group of 3 here. Group of 4 in the back. Okay? 4 in the back. Let's go ahead and make 3 different groups here. Yes? Brian Weber has brought the suit. He is the plaintiff. The defendants are the union and the company. Primarily, I think, the company. And we're supposed to decide whether Weber's civil rights have been violated and whether the company has discriminated against him in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So are you going to decide in favor of Weber or the company is what you need to decide as jurors? Yes, please do. In fact, please designate one member of your group to be the scribe Okay, and I would like for you guys to try to reach a consensus in each of your groups. Okay, so reason with each other until you reach a consensus if you don't at first agree. And I would also like to see from the scribe about 2 or 3 reasons. So everyone come up with about 2 or 3 reasons why you reach the consensus that you do in your group. Okay, please write the names of the members of your group on your page so I can take attendance that way. Let's go ahead and split. Okay, let's first hear from the group in the back. Who did you guys decide in favor of, Weber or the company? In favor of the company?
Yes.
Okay, good. Why so?
We think he's just bitter.
Okay.
We believe, okay, so
Quite possibly, he could be.
You might have heard what I just said, is that he is, yes, he is white, and then the company did take younger black people to work or to receive the training program.
Okay.
But it's like what I said like a few weeks ago. This is just business. They need people to get up to speed with the production, so they can make money or without like spending too much time on training or having like the older employees train the newer employees, so which is like takes a longer time. But like so basically they need to like keep the cost to the minimum. So it makes sense. That's fun. And another thing is like that just it just doesn't make sense because you didn't get a training position. It's like what I said. You might have heard me, but if I'm an adjunct professor and I'm not white, and then I come to university and meet a professor that's been teaching for 45 years, and then he is white, and then I'm just gonna be like to the school, be like, hey, why is he getting more pay than I am? I'm gonna sue you. Like, doesn't make sense.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Or it's the other way, or the white professor goes to the school say, hey, why is he receiving more training than I am? Doesn't make sense.
Okay. All right. So a couple comments. Thank you. Thank you very much. First comment is he may well be bitter, but that's probably not a reason to decide the case against him. Just something to think about, right? You probably need to come up with some sort of objective reason that's independent of his motives. Second comment is he actually does have seniority, right? So this is not a circumstance where it would be analogous to your professor example.
Right. Well, it's the opposite one as the white professor that has been there for a while that's suing the school.
Yes, that's
Yes.
basically what's going on.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And also he is suing based on it is unlawful to discriminate because of race. And
That's what he's arguing. Yes, that's correct.
exactly, but there is I don't see how race is involved in it because they receive these new workers from the black new workers. They just happen to be black, and if they're white, they're still going to be training them. So this case, in my opinion, or in our opinion, does not stand.
Okay. All right.
I'm the judge, I would just reject.
Just throw it out, huh? Okay. Good. Thank you so much. Let's hear from this group down here. What did you guys come up with?
Well, according to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it made it unlawful to discriminate based on race, and the training program only accepts 1-to-1 ratios for black to white, even if there's a vastly greater proportion of white people applying for the training.
Okay.
Which seemed to be the case because there was only it was less than a 4%.
That does seem to be the case. Yes.
For employment.
Mhm.
And this guy having seniority, usually companies, unless they're really trying to cut costs as much as possible, usually companies will allow people in that have more seniority so that they can train others and be a valuable asset to the company.
Right.
And so we believe that Brian Weber has the better argument here because, well, first off, he's white and he was rejected based on the color of his skin. We believe so. I mean, it's clear because they are seeking for that 50% being African American.
So they are using a racial
They're
criteria.
using racial criteria,
Okay.
which specifically violates the Civil Rights Act because that is discrimination. Whether you say it's like you're I don't know, you're doing something in order to limit the population of white people and
Okay.
increase the population of black people.
Right.
That's limiting one population solely on the basis of the color of their skin.
Okay.
So I believe it violates that, and obviously skilled workers should matter more than the color of their skin.
Sure.
If someone is more skilled skilled, they should be hired for the job. I don't see why any, like she brought up the example of you don't want a surgeon that's Korean or Hispanic or white or black. You want a surgeon that's good. You want a surgeon
Right.
that's more skilled, and whenever they open up your body, they're going to do the right thing.
Right.
So whether or not they're black, white, or in between, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah, go for it, Zoe. Yeah.
And also, I think, but there is some very complex history with whites and blacks. But so let's just say this was between like Native Americans and blacks, because they both can be really,
Sure.
very.
Sure. So forget the whole white-black distinction. Make it Native American.
Yeah, so if this company said they wanted to hire 50% Native American and 50% black, then I think, like, let's say I was black, then I would feel that is not fair.
Okay.
Because there are 9 of Native Americans anyway.
Okay.
But so I think, if we just pick up the white and let's just pretend it's Native American versus black, then we can, I think, also say that this is race.
Then the fact that it is violating the Civil Rights Act, at least according to you guys, it comes into clearer relief because we have removed some of the obfuscating kinds of realities here. Okay, great, good reasoning. All right, I want to list 2 arguments here. One for affirmative action, which I have not heard yet, but it's the most common argument in favor of affirmative action, and then one against it, which I just heard over here. Okay, both are the most common arguments. All right, so one argument for affirmative action is that it remedies distribution injustices. In education, skills, etc. Education or opportunities, I'll put here. Let me talk this argument for just a minute. This is a powerful argument, probably the most powerful argument in favor of affirmative action. If a certain demographic group has been discriminated against or is actively being discriminated against, whether explicitly in society or implicitly, then, so reasons this argument, steps need to be taken to act counter to that discrimination. Okay, and to just offer an example here, okay, if you're having trouble seeing where the discrimination might lie, if you look at the public school system in America, it very quickly becomes apparent that there are some haves and other have-nots in the public school system. Okay, public schooling is largely in America based on housing. And Americans live near people who are like them. Okay, the overwhelming reality in housing is segregation on the basis of race or socioeconomic class. Now that determines education and where students will go to school. And if you look at the schools, the AFAM kids going to school in the inner cities are getting much lower test scores because they're being given far fewer opportunities than the white and Asian kids going to school in the suburbs. So this argument says because some minority students, or now workers, including especially AFAM workers, have been given fewer educational possibilities, fewer opportunities in general in life. They started out on what was not an even playing field. Efforts need to be made to provide affirmative action to advance them in the workforce, in education, in this training program. Okay, that's the argument in favor of affirmative action, probably the most prominent such argument. Okay, there's an argument against affirmative action, which I just heard over here. Let me put that here on the board. Affirmative action is wrong. It is unfair because it discriminates on the basis of a factor which people can't control, namely the color of their skin. So this is the unfairness argument, we'll say. Brian Weber can control how long he has worked at the company.
Well, I think you should modify that a bit, which people can control and doesn't limit their capability to do a job.
Good. Okay. Sure. Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. And
You could say you were born with a disease that
doesn't.
disqualify you from working at that place.
Right. It isn't relevant to job. I'll just put down isn't relevant to job. Thank you. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Brian Weber can control his skill set to some extent. Okay, I recognize that there are genetic differences across people. But hard work usually enables you to improve your skills. Brian Weber can control his company loyalty, how long he has worked there, what his seniority is, which is the other criterion that this company is basing things on. By the way, when affirmative action cases arise in educational settings, it's not seniority that's the criterion being trumped, it's skill set. Okay. But Brian Weber cannot control the color of his skin, and as such, when the company discriminates against him for its admissions to this training program, it is making a decision on the basis of an unfair criterion, something that he was just born with, not something that he as a human being can shape in the course of his life. Okay, does everybody understand these two arguments? So far, so good? All right, we've got one group in favor of the company, one group in favor of Weber. You guys get to decide. Who did you decide in favor of?
We were actually split 50-50.
You're split 50-50. Oh, great.
We have 2 people for Weber, 2 people for the company. I listed the reasons for the company.
Okay. So you listed the reasons for the company, but there are also 2 people for Weber?
I put as a group we did company,
Okay.
even though we were split.
Okay. All right. What are the reasons that were listed?
So the first one, I think it's a lot like the first argument, but the first one is diversity, that it's a good thing to push for a company, and that it's much harder for the Black people to get a job, and that it was helpful for them. And then the second one was that seniority might not be a good enough reason to have him be hired. Like perhaps he did stay in the company for a long time, but that doesn't mean his skill set was better. Perhaps the people that were junior actually naturally were more gifted or understood the project better, and
Okay.
that they could actually be more qualified.
Okay.
So that's kind of an argument of maybe there's more information that we don't know. Also, it would have been interesting to know, like, well, I guess it would be nice to know more about the information, not kind of both sides, but maybe the local town. It says that we are only 39% of the workforce.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I misunderstood that as the company, but no, that's
No,
what's
that's the
available
local
in
town. Yeah.
So.
Company
they're
does not
inflating
reflect
that
the
to
local town.
50%. But anyway, it would have been interesting to know like how much the African community is there around business.
Okay.
And then number 4.
Oh.
Sorry, I a lot.
Okay. So I've heard 3 reasons so far. One is I think this reason. One is the second reason that diversity is a good thing, and the third reason that I heard is that seniority is a bad criterion. We could, if we substituted out seniority for merit, that might make some people decide this case differently.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's actually the seniority merits criterion is not quite as relevant to this topic because you can use whatever other criterion you want to use. The question is, should race be used as a trumping criterion over and against that other criterion, whatever it is?
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, these are all very good. Let me talk this argument for just a minute. This argument is not as common as this one, but it is increasingly popular. And it's got many advocates. So it might be something like this. companies are stronger when their leadership reflects a variety of perspectives. And when the board of directors has people from a bunch of different ethnic backgrounds, and not just a single perspective or two perspectives or something, then it's better capable of making wise, competitive, innovative decisions than it would otherwise be able to do. So diversity is a good thing. And it is good to have diversity in leadership, good to have diversity across a variety of spectrums in society. Okay, that's an increasingly popular argument these days. Okay, let me just go ahead and list a couple other arguments. Did you guys have one more?
Not for
Not for this?
okay,
Okay.
so,
Let me list an argument against affirmative action. Our class seems to have been split 50-50. Affirmative action is a form of racism. AA for affirmative action is racism, and racism is bad. Again, this is a really straightforward argument too. If you look in human history, whenever human beings have made decisions on the basis of race, sorted people into different groups on the basis of race, enslaved some on the basis of race, it's caused problems, lots of problems, horrible problems even. So according to this argument, it would be better if we stopped thinking in race-based terms entirely in the ways in which we sort people in society. Okay, there are a lot of people in this particular debate who point out the fact that to some extent race is kind of a fiction. Okay, because we're all kind of mutts. At the end of the day, we all have a background that's mixed from a variety of different ethnic sources. So this whole idea of one race being different from another is kind of a human construct. And the advocates of this argument would say it's better to just do away with racism entirely, or to the best of our ability to do away with racism, rather than to continue to think in race-based terms. Maybe your group will get favored right now because of power dynamics, but if we continue to think in race-based terms, some years from now when power dynamics switch, it might be your group that gets discriminated against, precisely because race was continued to be used as a sorting criterion. Okay, now there is a counter-argument to that. I think everybody understands the argument I just made. There is a counter-argument to this. Okay, let me pitch the counter-argument in the form of an example. So I was reading an article that was summarizing a study. It was not too long ago, and apparently the researchers went into a junior high, and they had some kids, one group of kids wear red shirts, and the other group of kids wore blue shirts. And the idea was to see what would happen in the dynamics of the kids. Okay, and the study was supposed to be conducted over 3 weeks, but they had to stop the study after 1 week. The problem is that gangs of roving blue shirts would be corralling small, weak, and sickly red shirts and beating them up in corners, and vice versa. Like the red shirts would be, finding the blue shirts and brawling it out. Because apparently, according to the researchers, this was their conclusion, it's so inbred in humans, for some reason, just to make sorting decisions on the basis of appearance, that we just automatically align into groups just on the basis of how people look. Okay, so the counter-argument to this is that it is too utopian to think that we can stop using race as a category of thinking. That race is just kind of, or appearance, or color, just kind of something that human beings always turn to as a sorting mechanism. And in the real world, we will always think in those categories, and it is too utopian to think that we can do away with that. Okay, any comments on either of these two arguments? I am going to put third arguments up on the board for and against, but are there any comments on either of these two arguments so far? Yes, Sohi. Mm-hmm.
If it was education, I might actually be for it, because I think think like in education, I think it's really important to have, teachers that look like you or something like that for kids, just to feel more accepted. But like this is for adults, and I think adults already have their identity ready, and I mean, and so this is also to have alumni. So, I mean, not that having diverse representation is not important in this type, but for me, I would push it hard. Like, I would actually, I think I would change to 4 if it was for school.
Okay.
This is alumina, so that I'm.
Interesting. Interesting. So based on the different settings, you might actually change your views. Interesting. Good, good. Any other comments so far on either of these two arguments? Are you convinced by any of these arguments so far? Anyone? Okay.
I just believe that he's bitter.
You just believe that he's bitter.
Yeah.
You know what the reality is, man, on this issue?
Yeah, what happened?
People come to their opinions on the affirmative action issue based on who they are, who they themselves are. Right? Typically, not always, but for the great majority of people, if you're white, you come out against affirmative action because you don't get advantaged by it. If you're Afghan, you come out in favor of it because you get advantaged by it, right? If you're Asian, Asians usually hate affirmative action because they are almost never privileged by it. I had a sweet Chinese lady in my class last year, and this topic came up in a roundabout way, and boy, she just went off on this topic. Boy, she was like, this is just used as a front to discriminate against Asians.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
And well, the reality is, when you look at it at education admissions, it's much harder for Asians to get into top universities than it is for other kinds of groups because there are so many more successful, meritful Asian students. They call it the bamboo ceiling, actually. Like, there's a name for it because, like,
Like instead of the glass ceiling?
yeah, they call it the bamboo ceiling because, like, Asian students get discriminated against so seriously in admissions decisions. So anyway, what you are almost always shapes your actual views on this topic. Okay,
It's the culture. It's like, like, for example, like whatever culture you are, like that's the mindset that you have.
yeah,
So like that's why, because like Hispanics think different from blacks and like Asians think different from whites. It's just the way you're brought up and the way you're raised shapes you.
yeah, that could very well be. I'm not sure.
I'm more inclined to say like racist just isn't a thing. Because again, like what is Hispanic race? What is white race?
Sure.
Hispanic could be white, black.
Sure.
Hispanic actually isn't even a race.
Actually, most Latinos, once they reach second or third gen Americans, they start self-identifying as white on census forms.
I say I'm white because I'm white.
Yeah, it is. It's totally like a fiction to a certain extent. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So I guess what makes this kind of tough too is 1974, so that's pretty close to the civil rights.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
So the seniority in the company, is that pre-civil rights? Some of those people.
That's a great comment, man. I appreciate that comment a lot. So probably Weber's got seniority in this company in large part because the company may have been actively discriminating against African Americans in its hiring decisions. I think that's a terrific comment. Maybe if we imagined this case today, as opposed to 1974, we'd be thinking about it very differently. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
But I really don't see this as a thing. But I think the other side makes a good argument that it's so ingrained in human nature to see these dudes, and I mean they exist.
Right.
Absolutely, and they do influence. And
It's like
so
the
I'm not
realists
sure
versus the idealists.
where
Yeah.
I'm not sure where the middle ground on that would be actually.
Yeah.
Because I do see that on both. I do think both sides actually make a good point.
Good. Let me put two final arguments up here. And these arguments are actually not as popular, again, as these top two arguments, but they are held by a certain number of people in this debate. Okay, so one argument for affirmative action is the reparations argument. Reparations for historical wrongs. Okay, what is meant by this argument? Well, if you look back in American history in particular, but also the history of some other countries, deep historical wrongs were quite obviously committed in America on the basis of racial categories. Okay, and like really, really bad wrongs that destroyed the lives of millions of people. And so the reparations argument says some compensation is needed for that injustice, that historical wrong. Now the problem is the people directly, the recipients of the wrong, are now no longer with us. Their descendants are with us, and the descendants arguably to some extent continue to suffer the aftershock effects of the deep historical wrong. And the other problem is the people who would be paying the compensation are not themselves the one who actively did the wrong. However, they are the descendants of those who actively did the wrong. And as such, according to this argument, they continue to receive the benefits, the economic benefits of the slaveholding class, etc., and should pay compensation, reparations for the historical wrongs. Drew.
So, for that argument, so let's say whenever we won World War II, Germany obviously was in the wrong. They were the ones that did that. How long were they set back? How far did we set them back because of the wrongs they did? How much did they pay us? And then also,
Well, they paid the Jews, actually, is what they did.
well, also, but are the people that didn't do the wrong?
That's a
still
great
paying
question.
For that?
Yeah.
Because if we are forcing them to still pay, even though they aren't the ones that did it, then I think there's legal grounds for the reparation.
So they are not still paying for that, no.
Okay.
However, whenever the issue of, some sort of abuse against Jews occurs, or some other issue involving Israel or something like that, Germany always immediately apologizes. They start apologizing because they feel so bad about it. Right? It's like the eternal apology. But no, they are no longer paying active monetary reparations. That is a more recent historical event than slavery in the United States. That is true. That is correct.
When my cousins lived in Germany, no one would bring it up at all, and if someone brought it up, someone would immediately start apologizing.
Deep shame. Yeah, they have no other response. They can think of no other response other than shame and embarrassment. Yeah.
Most of the people that are living in Germany, they're not even responsible for it.
Right. Yeah. So that's the counter argument to this is, are we going to pay reparations to people who were not themselves wronged from people who did not themselves do the wrong? Right. That's the counter argument here. Now, the argument in favor of reparations is that even if people who did not themselves receive the wrong, okay, even if they are the ones receiving compensation now, still, it might be justified because they received the aftershocks of the wrong, right? The decimation to the socioeconomic circumstances.
Then the question is, how long do these aftershocks remain? How long is it to when it's justifiably paid?
Yeah, and opponents of this argument say, okay, are we going to go back in history and look at all the wrongs that everybody's done?
Because
And
it's been on both sides as well.
sure. And how far back does it go and all that? Yeah, for sure. Okay, one argument then against affirmative action, it harms minorities. How does it harm minorities? Well, it harms the minorities. Actually, I should put harms minorities, it tries to help. So this argument basically says affirmative action is well-intentioned, but it actually hurts people. How does it hurt people? Well, in two ways. One way that it hurts people is by harming their own personal character developments and skill mastery. Okay, if you go outside and you happen to see a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, what ought you not to do at that moment? You don't help it, right? You're not supposed to help it. Okay, it is essential that it actually go through the struggle of mastering the skill itself so that it can be strong enough to, be able to flap its wings and fly around and stuff. Okay, and so this argument says it's essential that minorities not be given a free pass so that they can work just as hard as everybody else, earn it just as hard as everybody else, and master the skill set just as much as everybody else. It harms minorities to offer free things. Okay, the other aspect of this, the second aspect of the second way in which it arguably harms minorities, is it harms their image in the view of the rest of society. Okay, so this group referenced that over here in their reasons. If you need to have open heart surgery and you go to the cardiac surgeon, would you really rather have someone who got through medical school from affirmative action over and against someone who did not get any affirmative action boost? I think most of us, if we were honest, would say no. I'd rather have someone who did not get an affirmative action boost. And when you see people who are in a station of prominence or a leadership position, and they're, arguably a recipient of affirmative action, people think to themselves, well, they only got into this station in life because of special advantages that they were given, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so it harms minorities in their social standing. Okay, 3 arguments for it, 3 arguments against it, all of them very powerful, prominent arguments with many advocates in the culture. I should say these probably occur in kind of descending order in terms of how many people hold them. So this is the most popular argument for it, most popular against it, and it kind of goes in descending order like this. Only about 1/3 of the people who are for affirmative action actually support reparations as a reason. Okay, but it is a pretty vocal third. They often make a splash around election time, and politicians often pander to them by announcing that they're going to support a bill with $5 trillion in reparations or something like that in order to obtain their votes. Let me stop and ask if there are comments or reflections on any of these arguments. Yes.
I'm not sure maybe it's not slavery, but like Korea in history, we've been colonized by Japan numerous of times.
Oh yeah, it's a very sad story, very sad
Yeah,
history.
like, just Koreans like walking on the street, your nose can get cut off by Japanese, and you think that it's allowed, stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah, I have read very, very bad stories about it.
So, my mom's generation above hates Japan, but starting from my generation, we just see them as like, but when we work with Japan, in the end, we have better economical gain. So, like my generation is fully okay now, but so I feel like I don't like either of these number 3s, but I think both of them actually help not work with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like that one's like, oh, pay me back, let's not work together. And that one's like, minorities, you guys need to do yourself or something. But I feel like maybe there's like education or something that could show, like maybe like case of Korea or something where, my moms and above generations like literally hated each other. Nobody, like when Japan got tsunami, people 40 and older that was commenting was like so happy, like, yeah, you should go to hell.
Oh really?
Like, but the people like 20 and under,
Right.
you were like, oh, we're so sorry for you or something.
Right.
But anyway, so it was very weird and stuff. But I'm just saying, so I think maybe like instead of advocating either of the number 3, I think the people can advocate there's more economical gain by working together and maybe better.
Okay, good. Yeah. So to think about this issue in a more collaborative way rather than in terms of arguments that could divide us from each other, I think is an interesting point. Okay, good. Anybody else? Last comments on this topic. For what it's worth, I've tried not to say anything until now. I actually favor affirmative action, but not on the basis of race. I favor it on the basis of poverty. I am opposed to race-based affirmative action. Primarily for this reason. Call me utopian, but I think racism is really bad, and I think that if we just stopped constantly being obsessed with the race topic, we could actually free ourselves from lots of problems as humans. And at the same time, I do favor affirmative action on the basis of poverty. If you came out of impoverished circumstances, I think that you do deserve some sort of special leg up in the educational or workplace hiring and firing process. And actually, in practice, a poverty-based affirmative action would primarily help the minorities that a race-based affirmative action is supposed to help. I think it would be more precise and more targeted. I'm a little bit skeptical, though, about whether a poverty-based affirmative action would ever be implemented, because our society is just kind of obsessed with the race topic. So it's kind of what we constantly think about.
No, but I think you're so right, because like if it was written based on like, 50%, you're gonna hire 50% who has like this certain income and they're growing up or something.
Sure.
I don't think this lawsuit would even have made it to the Supreme Court.
Sure.
Like,
Okay.
Because I don't know. I mean, because that, like, it doesn't violate the civil rights.
Okay.
Maybe not in the situation in 1974, but today, it seems that if you did affirmative action based on racism, you're assuming that race that you're helping is all in power.
Right. Sure. This case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was decided in favor of the company. Weber lost. Okay. Very famous case. This case was reversed, however, in the 1990s, when a new Supreme Court decided a series of other cases, including actually a case that arose out of Texas, the famous Hopwood decision. It was a UT Austin Law School admissions decision on the basis of race. And if this case were to come before the court right now, it would probably be decided in favor of Weber. But the society is really split on this topic, right? It's probably about 55-45 against affirmative action, but it all depends on how the wording is in the question on the poll, and it's really a split society on this topic. Yes?
I think if it comes to the Supreme Court right now, it might still actually be in favor of the company. Because as far as I remember, the Republicans still hold the majority of the Supreme Court right now, right?
Yeah, usually it's thought that there's a conservative majority on the court right now, yes.
So consider that the conservatives usually would think of affirmative action stuff like, leaning toward the white people's side or the company side sometimes.
Oh, no. They're opposed to affirmative action. The conservatives generally are opposed to it.
Oh.
Yeah, so they would favor Weber almost certainly.
Oh, I'm not gonna. Oh, wait. Weber is the dude, right?
Weber's the dude who's suing the company. Yeah, the court in 1974, though, definitely favored the company. They won the case. It was 5-4, I believe, if I remember.
Yeah, I think I might be mixing it up with these.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll keep that
I'll
thought.
think about that and I'll
Okay.
catch up with you.
All right.